This is NEGOTIATEx TV.
Hello and welcome to the NEGOTIATEx podcast. I am your host and co-founder, Nolan Martin. With me, as usual, is my good friend, Aram, the other co-founder, co-host of NEGOTIATEx. And I'm pretty sure we got a pretty awesome guest for today lined up, Aram.
Yeah, we absolutely do. One of the things that Nolan and I pride ourselves on, bringing in people with different perspectives, different worldviews, being able to hear from a variety of folks. And today, I'm excited to introduce our guest, Jay Payleitner, the author of Don't Take the Bait, De-Escalate. Conflict is inevitable. Being a jerk is optional. There aren't too many books with jerk in the title, but especially from a Christian author. So I'm excited to jump into this. Let me say a little bit more about Jay, and then I'm gonna turn it over to him. Jay's a prolific writer. He's written more than 25 books, sold more than 500,000 copies. Now, Jay spent a decade in market advertising for airlines and beer. That must have been a lot of fun. Along the way, he learned how people think while doing a lot of fun work. Then he then felt a calling into Christian media, and he became a freelance producer for Josh McDowell Radio, Today's Father, Jesus Freaks Radio with Toby Mack and Michael Tate, and Project Angel Tree with Chuck Colson. A longtime affiliate with the National Center for Fathering, Jay is a nationally known motivational speaker for Iron Sharpens Iron, marriage conferences, men and women's retreats, and writers' conferences. During the pandemic, Jay co-founded Benevolent Think Tank with 8 fellow altruistic and creative partners. Jay and his high school sweetheart, Rita, live in Chicago, where they've raised 5 great kids, loved on 10 foster babies, and are cherishing being grandparents. And if I'm correct, 7 grandchildren. Is that right, Jay?
8.
8 now. Congratulations. Jay, thanks for being with us today.
Well, Nolan and Aram, I got your email a little bit ago, and it's like, man, this is a great organization. This is stuff that needs to be said. So I'm privileged to hang out with you for a little bit here. Let's help some folks, de-escalate conflict and negotiate better. We can do that, I think.
I hope so.
Absolutely. So first, I want to kind of jump in here and talk about the book, Don't Take the Bait, to Escalate. First off, phenomenal title. Great job. But kind of what was your inspiration to really get into conflict resolution?
Well, you just look around, man. There's conflict all over the place. And
Really?
I am, after writing a bunch of books, you start to talk to people, and they are hurting. So many people are hurting in the middle of conflicts that they don't know how to deal with, and they're frustrated by it. And you got COVID, you got politics, you got racial unrest, you got family squabbles, you got Thanksgiving dinner tables where people are just don't even show up anymore because it's so frustrating. You got Ukraine, although the book was written before that, and I came to realize that there's so much of that, even within my own extended family. My core family is fine, but and I wanted to use my gifts. I mean, we all have our gifts. And I write books. It's like I'm going to write a book on conflict. Kicking around with my publisher, they came up with the title "Don't Take the Bait, to Escalate." I'm going, that's perfect, but it's like, what is it really about? So we had to make the subtitle work pretty hard and be pretty clear. So the subtitle is conflict is inevitable. And everybody is nodding their head that conflict is inevitable. And then the second part of the subhead was, and we have to find a nice way to get through it. We had to find a nice way to deal with it. But instead, we came up with being a jerk is optional, which says that exact thing. So all that to say, to answer your question, I saw conflict. I know my gifts is writing and doing some research and kicking around ideas. And so far, I'm getting feedback from readers now. The book's been out just a few months, and we're making a difference.
That's the important thing. And, it reminded me, as you were just talking about that, one of the heavy influencers on the work we do was a gentleman by the name of Roger Fisher, wrote Getting to Yes back in, I believe it came out in 1980 or 1981. But Roger Fisher used to say, we've got to find a way to disagree without being disagreeable. And I think that implies a lot of what your subtitle does, right? Conflict is inevitable, and we'll dig into some of how people feel about that. How we respond to it is a choice.
I'm going to even push back a little bit on that if I
Yeah,
can. You know what?
please do.
Much of my book and much of my attitude is let's try to get people on the same side. Listen to each other, and a little empathy is so critical. So it's not like we're going to agree to disagree, and then we're going to hate each other and go our separate ways. Let's see if you can help to understand each other. As I talk with my hands here, let's see if we can. You see my side, I see your side, and we're not going to agree. But you know what? Maybe if you can see where I'm coming from, that's going to help a lot, so that we can sit in a conference room together. We can be political leaders and share ideas and come across the aisle and hang out and have a cold beverage sometime together and enjoy each other's company still.
I like that. Yeah, thank you for the correction. I think that was a good way to tune what I was saying. All our listeners have a diverse background of faiths, Jay. And I think as I look across, and Nolan and I haven't worked in the Middle East and elsewhere, worked with folks of a lot of different faiths. Almost all faiths talk about conflict in some way, shape, or form. You shared a number of ways we see it in the world today, from international to national to the family table. What's your take? Is conflict a bad thing? And should a person who consider themselves spiritual avoid conflict at all costs?
I'm going to set aside the spiritual question for a second and just come down down to the root of the matter and say conflict is a good thing. Conflict is what makes products improve and people dig deep and do their best and such. I do marriage conferences, lead marriage conferences, and there might be 50 couples out there in an audience. We're talking maybe this a second day into the conference. I'll say, "Hey, how many of you couples have hit bottom in your marriage?" And about half of them will raise their hand, and then I'll say, "Ain't it great?" And they nod their heads. They know exactly what I'm talking about because, boy, if you've been married 6 or 8 or 10 or 20 years, if you haven't had one time when you kind of hit bottom and were forced to look at each other and say, we got to make this work. That's where strong marriages come from, hitting bottom. So in that sense, conflict is a good thing in marriage if you come together and work it out. You think about a manufacturer who sends a defective product out. That's conflict right there because you could lose a customer right there. But if you have a great customer service department and takes care of that problem right away, you've got a customer for life then. And suddenly that conflict, it's almost like you want to kind of plan to send out the defective products once in a while. And then if you can solve that crisis quickly, I'm not recommending that, but
Right.
that's how.
Good.
Do they do that? They might do that. Some company smarter than me might do that. Send out a slightly defective product, and never mind. No, anyways, there are other examples. I'm just going to jump. Another one here would be think about the two best athletes on a high school baseball team. Those two boys, let's say, they both want to play shortstop. They both want to be the heroes of the team and bad cleanup. Well, a good coach is going to see that conflict and make the whole team better. Not just those two boys, but the whole team is going to be elevated because they see how hard those guys are working to be the star of the team, the starting shortstop. And one will pitch and one will play. They'll figure it out. And then those two boys, and I've seen it in my own life because I have 4 boys who play baseball. Those two boys in the team, they're going to be best friends because they're working at each other. So again, conflict, if you look at it from the other side, it doesn't have to drag you down. It can challenge you to greatness.
Yeah. I love all that. Personal story from high school cross country, one of my best friends, even to this day. And we would every practice was like the state tournament. And guess what? At state, he was 4th and I was 5th, and our team won the state cross country championship.
He was 4th and you were 5th.
Yeah, but our team, because we pulled people won. I also listen to what you said about marriage, and it does apply. I love how you talked about the application to business, but the strength of a relationship is really you know how strong it is, not by the fact that there's no conflict, right? Or there's no mistakes, but it's how you handle those
Yeah,
things, right?
right.
And that tells you how strong things are.
Well, another conflict, and this will hit close to home with many of your viewers, listeners. Um, you might have an alcoholic in your family, and that intervention that they recommend is that's the definition of conflict right there. But if it's done right with empathy and a good leader in that situation, I mean, God's gonna come in. God is gonna enter that situation and work a miracle in that guy's life. But it takes that conflict to do that. Um, I got to go to James in the New Testament, that trials of many kinds test your faith and produce perseverance. Trials produce perseverance. So again, conflict is a good thing if you approach it the right way.
All right, so wanted to start jumping into the book, Jay, and I wanted to kind of describe the 4 factors. How do they help someone navigate conflict?
Well, even in some of the examples we just did, but yeah, let me give you the 4 factors that work for in business and in family relationships and any conflict. One would be decide what you really want. If you're in a conflict, decide what you really want. And a good example of that would be early in my marriage, terrible, tremendously horrible conflict with my wife. She liked creamy peanut butter, and I liked crunchy peanut butter. Now, can you imagine?
She's clearly wrong, by the way.
Okay. Well, you don't say. I can't say that.
All right, go ahead.
So what do I really want? I want my crunchy peanut butter. But what I really want is to start my marriage off right. I want to I want some extra smooches from my new bride, that kind of thing, if you know what I'm talking about. Okay, decide what you really want, because it's not the crunchy peanut butter, it's the solid marriage. And then second would be to know the risks. Again, the 4 factors. Decide what you really want, know the risks. And the risk would be if I'm a jerk about this whole thing and do what, yeah, you're wrong. We're only going to have crunchy peanut in my house. God darn it. Well, then she goes home to mom and the marriage is over. Come on. I mean, there's risk to any conflict, and you got to realize that. And then the third factor is empathize with your adversary. Wow. You know what? The fact that my wife likes creamy peanut butter, that is not sinful or terrible or horrible. As a matter of fact, I guess she likes that. So I'm going to empathize, see where she's coming from a little bit there. And then fourth is expect the win, which means that we're going to take the long view and see that if we work on our marriage, if we work on our problem, whatever this conflict is, that we should really be able to see how God uses it and how our relationships can be better and how we can turn that into a win. But God, in his sense of humor, in that particular example, um, uh, our initial reaction was, well, I'm going to be very magnanimous, and we're going to go. Every other jar is going to be crunchy and then creamy, and then when we run out of crunchy, we'll get a jar of creamy. So that'll be the way that we deal with this huge conflict in our marriage. But God, in His infinite wisdom, we were in the grocery aisle, peanut butter aisle, and we said, "Oh, we still have a half a jar of crunchy at home, so we should buy creamy now." And then we came home and put 2 jars next to each other, so you can buy 2 jars of peanut butter.
That's crazy.
Crazy.
Yeah, crazy.
Unbelievable.
So Jay, I got to tell you, so this example resonates with me on multiple levels. Okay. So one, I don't know where my wife and I will have been married 19 years in October. I don't know where you were 19 years ago, but I really could have used your insights because one of our first arguments was when she brought home a jar of creamy peanut butter. Not because that's what she preferred, but she didn't know what I liked. Okay. And we still laugh to it to this day because I was like, I was aghast. How could you get creamy peanut butter? That's not even real peanut butter, okay? If it doesn't have the nuts in it. And so we laugh about it to this day. But going further, to your point that you just made, my grandparents, okay? For years, my grandmother, and we heard this story after my grandfather had passed away, but we're talking, I think we may have shared our story. So it's just funny that all this seems to be around peanut butter. She said, for years, My grandfather preferred smooth, so she would buy smooth. And it wasn't until one day the light came on, as it did for you. She said, we could have 2 jars.
Sometimes in your conflict, in any conflict that anybody's dealing with, the answer is just real easy. If you take a step back, and again, you got to do the 4 factors. Decide what you really want. Know that there are risks involved. Empathize with your adversary and say, is there a way that we can make this work? Now, often there's not. So you have to dig deeper and do some true negotiation. But be optimistic. Expect the win, and you should be surprised how often you get that. Funny.
So part of what makes people uncomfortable with conflict is that it often feels like it comes out of nowhere. Can we actually anticipate conflict? And if so, how might that help us manage it more effectively?
Well, I think conflict, as we kind of already said, is part of life. We need to go into it, and every time we meet somebody, we're not looking for trouble, but we need to know that people are coming from different perspectives on problems. We don't want to, you have a choice when you come up with a conflict, minor or large, to either escalate or de-escalate. Sometimes we assume the worst. You assume the worst. You meet somebody, they're going to be a jerk about it. Or sometimes we assume that we have all the answers, and that'll lead to conflict, certainly, when we don't. If we empathize and listen. Sometimes we act too. Conflict comes up, we act too quickly. Let's solve it. And sometimes we don't act quickly enough. I'm thinking of I started a big campfire in my side yard, and the wind took the smoke around the corner into my neighbor's back porch where they were meeting with friends, and my neighbor came over and said, well, Jay, what's going on? And we had a little spar back and forth, and he left, and the smoke went away. But an hour later, I went over and I apologized to him. I mean, sometimes right away, you just act quickly. I want to apologize. It wasn't a big deal, but, and so then we're fine then. Otherwise, the next time I see him in the driveway, 2 days later, he's grumbling at me or I'm grumbling. It's like, no. So don't act too quickly sometimes, but sometimes act really quickly. Do a quick apology. It's amazing how sometimes that de-escalates conflict. So that's just one example. So listen, forgive, apologize, bring calm to the situation. There you go.
In your book, you talk about these 3 mistakes that we often we tend to make, and it feels like when we get kind of knocked off and we're not anticipating it, it catches us by surprise. These 3 mistakes you talk about are, we start to cast blame, we make very snap decisions, and then the third one is really interesting, right? We insist on a compromise, and I don't know if you want to say any more about the kind of these mistakes that we kind of tend to fall into, and why you think we just need to avoid them.
Well, very interesting. We always think that in a negotiation that we have to find a compromise. And many times when it comes to money or time or schedule, money, we need to think about a compromise. But in many other cases, a compromise is the worst thing you can do. Often, there's he wants that and you want that. Oftentimes there's a third option that you can agree on. It's not in the middle, but it's an entirely different option. But you know what? Let's say that you really love Italian food and your wife likes Mexican food. You know what? I think go to the Mexican restaurant. Just be magnanimous. Go to the great Mexican restaurant with the authentic Mexican food. Do that. And then maybe sometimes she'll say, hey, let's go to your favorite Italian restaurant. Now, a compromise would be you go to Denny's and get their Italian dish or their Mexican dish, and nobody wins in that one. You see the difference there?
You might be up all night too.
Or I don't want to offend any of your listeners here, but let's say he wants to live in Seattle and she wants to live in Miami. Well, you could compromise and live in Topeka, Kansas. And again, I'm sure you have some listeners in Topeka. I don't want to offend them, but the point is that sometimes look for the third answer.
Yeah.
Don't insist on a compromise. And again, my book kind of covers all that, but
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily selling the book here. But you got to deal with all these kind of things.
So I want to kind of go back to something you had talked about, and that was the option to de-escalate or escalate a situation. Is it really that simple when we think about the kind of choices that we have during conflict?
Well, you're making me think of my mentor um, was a negotiator for the big three automakers back in the day. This is in the '70s, so he's an older guy now. But back in the '70s, he was a negotiator for the big three automakers, and uh, they knew that they had to have their contract was up on a certain date, and they would start negotiating. They would rent hotel rooms and be the automakers would have a representative over here, and the union guys would have representatives over here, and they would meet supposedly, but they didn't meet. They would just kind of delay because they knew it would be the last few days before the contract was up that they would finally come to the table and negotiate. Um, and my friend remembers this. Mike remembers this one time when were supposed to negotiate every weekend, and they'd all be locked in these hotel rooms for every weekend. And at one point on a Friday morning, he said, "You know what, guys?" To his team, "You know what, guys? Let's just go home. Let's spend the weekend with your family." And uh, the next morning in the newspapers was Mike Penny cancels negotiations, and he got in deep weeds for that because his job was to stay in those hotel rooms till the contract was done. All that to say, back to the idea of negotiations, conflict is going to happen. We need to expect it to happen, but if I'm making any sense here, that's just one of the stories that you brought to mind with your question.
No, so that was a great story there, Jay. Really interesting to see how that one played out for him. So what was the outcome? Did he get in trouble, or did it all get resolved?
His bosses at the big three automakers knew what he was doing. He knew that it was fine, but there was later on, actually, there was in his career there was at least one strike where he had to dig deep and make some great concessions kind of thing. But no, that's all part of the game. It turns out to be all part of the game. Everybody knows what's going on. So he didn't lose his job, but he got his wrist slapped because he had to get his wrist slapped, and everybody knew what was going on. So that's all part of the negotiation dance sometime, which I'm sure many of your managers who are listening right now can negotiate. It's a dance, and you kind of got to expect sometimes going in that there are risks. But again, know what you want, decide what you really want, know there are risks, empathize with the other side, and kind of expect the win, because you know what? The cars are going to keep rolling off the line. They're not going to stop making cars in Detroit, at least back in the '70s. Maybe they will these days. I don't know.
Hey everyone, Nolan here. Please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. I have to jump in and end it right here. So sorry, but please be sure to join us next week as we continue our conversation with Jay. Hey, thanks for checking out this video on NEGOTIATEx TV. If you found any value at all, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification icon if you want to be notified of future videos. And then we also have a couple videos over here that you might be interested in checking out. If you and your small business, your team are looking to get negotiations or leadership training, then you can head over to NEGOTIATEx.com and learn more about the coaching services we offer. Thanks, and I'll see you over the next video.